When I first heard this story here in New Mexico, where I live, it began like this. Esta era una viejita. Simply like that. This was an old lady, una viejita. And the old lady in the story lived in her tiny adobe house at the edge of the village. And of course she was very poor. All she got to eat would be frijoles, that's beans, tortillas, you know what that is, chaquewe aguado, just thin cornmeal mush. Well, of course, she did get some vegetables from her garden, but most of those she would take into the village on a market day to sell or trade with other people for the few things she needed for her simple life. But this old woman was very thrifty, and she saved her money, un centavito hoy, un centavito mañana, a penny today, a penny tomorrow. Finally, she had enough to buy herself a big ham bone. She kept it hanging in the despensa, the cool, dark closet behind the kitchen. She would only cut a slice from that ham on very special occasions, or if she had the good fortune to share a meal with some company. Well, one evening, a couple of young men who were traveling through the country stopped at her house. They asked if they could have lodging for the night. The old woman didn't have any extra beds, but she told them she would be happy to spread a blanket on the floor for them to sleep on. They thanked her kindly. She just waved her hand. "Oh, es por nada," she said. "It's nothing at all. Now I'll get busy and make us a good supper." She got out her pots and her pans, and then she went to the despensa. She took the ham and cut 3 slices from it, 2 thick, generous slices for the young men, and a thin slice for herself. Those young men were delighted to see that she was preparing such good food for them. Not very often in their travels did they have such good food. But those 2 young men were a couple of rascals, and a very dishonest idea came into their minds. They decided to steal the old woman's ham that night while she was asleep. Well, after they had all eaten their fill, the old woman made a bed for them on the floor. She told them buenas noches y que durmieron con los angelitos. She bid them good night. She bade them good dreams. And then she went into her room to sleep. The young men didn't go to sleep. They lay on the floor talking about how nice it was going to be to have a whole ham to themselves. When they were sure the old woman was asleep, they got up and went to the cupboard and got the ham. One of them wrapped it up in one of his shirts and put it in his traveling bag. And then they lay back down and they fell asleep, and they had very good dreams indeed. But that old woman hadn't gone to sleep either. In the many years of her life, she had become a good judge of character. She had noticed the rascally glint in the eyes of those 2 young men, and she knew she had better watch out. When she heard them get up from the floor, she crept over to the door of her room and peeked out. She saw everything they did. Later that night, when the young men were sound asleep, she crept out of her room. She took the ham out of the traveling bag and hid it under her bed. And then she wrapped an Adobe brick in the shirt and put it in the traveling bag. The next morning when the young men awoke, they were anxious to be on their way. But the old woman insisted that they stay and eat breakfast. "It will give you strength," she said. "You have a long day of traveling ahead of you, and you may not find anything else to eat all day long." One of the young men winked at his friend and said, "Quizá tenga razón, abuelita. Maybe you're right about that," he said. "But do you know what? Last night I dreamed that my friend and I were going to be eating good food all day today." The old woman said, "Oh, really? Tell me more about your dream. I'm fascinated by dreams. I think that sometimes they are true." The young man smiled at his friend and said, "Well, in my dream, we were sitting under a tree in a beautiful land, eating good food, and I remember that the king of that land was named Hamoni el Primero." Jamón means ham in Spanish. It was like he was calling the king Hambone the First. His friend spoke up and said, "Oh, I had the same dream last night. We were in a land that was beautiful. The king of that land was named Hamoni el Primero, and I remember the name of that land was Travelly Bag." The two young men covered their mouths to keep from breaking out laughing, but the old woman didn't seem to notice. She seemed to be taking them very seriously. She said, "Oh, how interesting. And do you know what? I had a very similar dream myself. I dreamed about a land named Travelly Bag. The king of that land was Hamoni el Primero. But then the good people threw that king out and they put a new king in his place. The name of the new king was Adobe the Great. And for some people, that meant a time of great hunger had begun." The young men bit their lips to keep from laughing, and they said, "Oh, well, it was just a dream." They quickly ate their breakfast, and then they went away laughing at that old woman's foolishness. All morning long they traveled together, joking about the old woman. When midday approached, they began to feel hungry, so they sat down under a tree by the side of the road. One of them leaned back and closed his eyes. He said, "Well, here we are, just as I dreamed in the land of Travelly Bag. Don't you think it's about time to visit the king of that land?" His friend said, "Oh, yes, by all means. We had better see our good friend, Hamoni el Primero." He opened his traveling bag and took out the shirt and started to unwrap it. But then the smile ran away from his face. He said, "Ay, esa viejita entendía los sueños mejor que pensábamos. That old woman understood dreams better than we thought she did." His friend didn't open his eyes. He said, "What do you mean?" The other one said, "Well, do you remember? She said that King Hamoni el Primero had been thrown out. By any chance, do you remember the name of the king who had been put in his place?" His friend said, "Oh, yes, I do. Adobe the Great." Where do you think she came up with a name like that? The first young man said, "Open your eyes and I think you'll know." The young man opened his eyes He said, "Oh, I see what you mean. And I see what the old woman meant when she said that a time of great hunger was beginning. I'm starved." Those two rascals spent many hungry days together before they finally met another kind old woman who gave them a meal. And this time, they didn't even think about playing any tricks on her.